Welcome back. And we're moving into our first conversation this morning with Senator Mark Lizarraga, who is, of course, the senator representing the business community. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, and thanks for having me, both of you. It's a pleasure being back, Marlene and Isani.
Yes. Well, we're grateful to have you on this Monday morning. There are quite a number of issues that we wanted to discuss with you. Of course, starting off with the Senate investigation. You are a member on the investigation panel, and you have been very outspoken about the process that has been undertaken thus far. And also, at this point, it's a very crucial point, as it has been indicated that the funding of the investigation may not go beyond the next 2 months. So let me start off first with your response to the issue of funding.
Well, if I can, let me refer to the Chamber's response.
Yes.
Where the Prime Minister wrote, and he stated that extra budgetary allocations to cover expenses of the Select Committee would no longer be forthcoming. The Chamber takes a very dim view on this because it's saying basically if you're serious about oversight and if you're serious about your commitment to accountability and transparency, the rule of law, if you're serious towards going and making commitments to UNCAC, then if you look at the terms of our committee speaks about being independent, to hold an independent investigation. And certainly part of being independent would imply that you have to have the resources to do your job. So the Chamber, the net effect is that the Chamber has asked and encourages the Prime Minister to retract his financial ceiling expressed, and that they should do everything possible to extend all courtesies so that we can continue the important work of this committee, in a nutshell.
Yeah. Now, for some it may come as no surprise that there is an end being marked for the Senate investigation, or being proposed at this point based on the budget issue. As we have heard from the chairperson, we've heard from other ministers that they felt that the Senate investigation are either one of two things: that they've covered what needs to be covered, or that it has been ineffective in its purpose. How do you respond to those issues?
Well, we all have our biases. Certainly our terms of reference called for these hearings to be held in public. And I think the public, and I'd like to say thank you very much to the media for the excellent coverage that has been given to these important hearings, but I think the public has been well informed, has seen what has happened in this ministry, what has been happening in the various branches of the departments. And I think the people have a much better understanding now of what it is was taking place. I mean, let us call a spade a spade. I mean, we have seen ministers involved in illegalities. We have seen procedures totally not followed. We've seen procedures perhaps unclear in many instances. We have seen certain people that appear to have been the great facilitators. Anything that's not complete, you give it to them. No worry, it's going to be done. We've heard from CEOs who have said that they were not focused on the little things, they call it. They were focused on trying to get things organized and structured, and they were ignoring, for the most part, certain things. We've seen instructions from cabinet basically saying circumvent the law and do not follow established guidelines and procedures. We've heard from the new director that she has ignored those requests by cabinet, and she's continuing to do her own due diligence, as she should, according to the law. She's respecting the law and the procedures. So a lot has been going on. A lot more, in my view, needs to go on because we're now seeing that other departments affect and weigh in on that whole nationality process. So, I think it depends on where you're looking at it from. And if we truly want to fix this system, we truly need to understand what went wrong and where.
Do you believe that there should have been a definitive timeline set? Say, for instance, the length of the investigation shouldn't exceed 6 months. So that, let's say, for instance, within those 6 months, you call as many people, either that or you have more frequent meetings or sessions, as opposed to the weekly, every Wednesday you have a group of people who come and testify before the Senate panel. To have more frequent meetings, to try to get out as many people as you can within that 6 month span.
Well,
is it something that is now being protracted?
First of all, the committee makes its own rules, okay? And early on, the committee decided that it would only meet once per week. Some of us wanted to meet longer or more often, but the committee decided it wanted to meet once per week. And then the committee decides it wants to start at 10 in the morning and it wants to be over by 3. So right away, our time period is short.
Yeah.
But I don't think we need to look at it, with this time frame in mind, because I think what we need to do is we need to determine whether we have done sufficient work and whether we've investigated as much as we could investigate. I must highlight here, though, keep in mind, the Senate has been tasked with this because other institutions did not do their work. Had other institutions done the work that they should have done, had the very ministry given the attention to these mishaps, and I'm being nice, then we would not have been there. We would not have had the need for an investigation. So we're not full-time. We meet for a few hours. Sometimes it's difficult finding witnesses or getting witnesses, or sometimes
Getting them to comply.
Yeah, so exactly. So we have, in my view, we have still quite a bit of work to do. The committee will decide at the end of the day. It's not my view.
Yeah.
It's collectively we decide and we vote and we say who's going to be the next witness. So the committee decides.
One of the things that we have seen in the last Senate hearing was the current Director of Immigration coming in and speaking about changes that have been put in place since she has been there and since the revelation of some of the inefficiencies within the system itself. So I think oftentimes people see that and they say, okay, well, they're doing something now differently. But the purpose of the investigation is to understand what went wrong, who was responsible, and whether or not these persons should face any consequences or can face any consequences for what they have done. Now, looking at the process of the investigations itself, when you start to speak to the Director of Immigration, and subsequently we know the Minister of Immigration will be called in, it seems like you are completing the cycle as to who you can speak to. My question is, what direction do you see the investigation going from this point in time? If there is no issue with budget, if there is additional budget put forward, additional time, where does the investigation go from this point forward?
Speaking for myself, I believe that we need to look at the recommendations made by the Auditor General. She made some extensive recommendations. And I think we need to look in detail at what has been done for each specific recommendation. It is my intention to pursue along that line. I think we've identified at the last session that part of the loophole per se is that persons come on a visitor's visa for 30 days or extended to 60 days, and then they go in for a work permit. They're granted a work permit for a year. After they get that work permit for a year, they're entitled to residency. And then the process. So there are many things that we don't know. We've seen that vital statistics have been involved. Godwin Hall, Minister Halls has said that we've had issues in the vital statistics. So that there are just two areas that pop up immediately. It may be that we need to call in the legal people to understand some things better, to get clarity, to see where they're going with the legal reforms that need to be done. We've heard from the police, some, but we're still awaiting some feedback from the commissioner. We haven't gotten those. So there are quite a bit of things, I believe, that we need to tie up neatly before we start talking about finishing the process. That's my view.
Yeah, and I hear you very clearly saying the committee, and if I am to reflect on over a year ago where the conversation was being held of regarding the terms of reference for the committee, and that was also an issue with quite a bit of contention because the composition was important and how decisions would be made was also important. So the persons who would be called next has to be decided by the committee, and it must be approved by the president of the Senate as well.
Yes.
That's what the terms of reference lays out.
Yes, but in all fairness to the president, he has not denied us the right. He has not stopped us from calling any witness that we've called to the date. So,
from conversations with the rest of the committee, is it clear who you would like to speak to next, or who you would like to call as a witness next?
I can't discuss conversations within the committee. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Our standing orders prevent us from doing that.
When you look at the fact that some people are somewhat cynical based on the fact that perhaps this will be seen as just another exercise that never really materialized any meaningful changes. You have some people who would off the bat say, well, nobody not going to jail, and the hustling still are continuing on another farm down the road or what have you. And it's a perception that people have based on the fact that for some, we've been down this road before where there are either misappropriation, the idea of corruption, and having an inquiry thereafter to try to get to the bottom of what may have happened in those respective areas, but then no one is held responsible or accountable. Nothing becomes of it.
That's a legitimate concern, very valid. But please look at the system under which we operate. The Senate is only empowered to hold these hearings, okay? We're not empowered. We don't have the ability to arrest. We don't have the ability to prosecute. That job is for the police and working together with the office of the DPP. I can say that what we've done is all the files, all the testimony that has been sent to us is being sent to the DPP for her determination. The system that we have, unfortunately, puts a politician in charge of our law enforcement, in charge of our police. I'm not making any aspiration, I'm just saying that aspersions. I'm just saying it is what it is. And one certainly questions why it is that so much is happening in our country today, and yet we see the police in some cases being forced by the courts to take action. So it certainly highlights a weakness in our system that needs to be addressed. Back to the legitimate concerns of the public. They need to be aware. They need to understand what it is that is causing the system not to work in the way it's working, and then they need to make a determination as to how they're going to handle it.
To play devil's advocate here, just to illustrate a point a bit further, might it be that the public, in a sense, would want to see some action take place for them to be able to say, well, perhaps it's understandable why we would be paying this much money monthly or based on the quarter or however the fiscal breakdown for the expense to have the inquiry going? Would it be that some people would say, well, I need to see some results. Maybe that will justify why we're paying people so much money every month to have one hearing. How would you respond to something like that?
Let me throw it back at you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you get paid, and I'm sure this station spends a lot of money in informing, educating the people of this country. And I'm sure the people of this country appreciate the work that you do. We're similar to you. All we can do is give them the information. And what the people do with that information becomes a part of the democratic process. Now, at some stage, we need to talk about the democratic process and how that has been warped as well. And I'll say this, that is one of the most concerning things for us at the end of the day, because this whole immigration scandal was highlighted even more by the press around election time. And we know, we have heard from a former director that the process was sped up. It was a lot more active, specifically just before election time. We know that one of the recommendations that nobody has disagreed with yet is that our nationality register needs to be audited. Because you don't know today who is a genuine Belizean and who has gone through the process in the right way. So that affects our democracy. If you have people from other countries that can come to vote, here we are, we just heard this thing the other night with Belizeans, you know, complaining about their right to participate in the democratic process. And now we have foreigners who have come in and are entitled sometimes in 1 day, in 1 week, in 1 month. And they have the same rights like you and I, Sani. Our people need to know that, and they should be concerned about it. They should be concerned about it. How does it affects us in many, many different ways. My biggest concern is we have 8,000 kids coming out of school every year. Where are the opportunities for them? We see foreigners come into our country and they have carte blanche. They have opportunities. The roads are opened for them. It's almost that they can get away with anything and nothing is done to them, facilitated by our public service and our politicians. And then the kids coming out of school, what opportunities are we leaving for them? That is concerning. And the true Belizean businessmen, they're dying breed. What are we doing for them? What are we doing to create opportunities for them?
Now, I want to get back to the funding issue and the concerns that have been brought forward by the chamber at this point, because it's a tight deadline, and we have to look at what may potentially take place, which might be the ending of the funding going towards the investigation, and what will happen then. So let me get your response to that.
Well, first of all, the chamber was very clear. That's it, and they said moving forward, the answer has to be not in limiting funding for this committee, but rather ensuring where applicable is that we have all the resources needed to go ahead. Again, they recommended that this position be retracted by the Minister of Finance.
Citing the independence of the committee.
Yeah, and this is important, especially the chamber says, given the volume of scandals and corruption we've seen in recent media reports, these investigative bodies and check and balance mechanisms should be regarded as an investment, not as an expense. Listen, when we launched this this medium-term strategy paper the other day, the plan 2016-2020, we made commitments to borrow $400 million. Nobody has spoken much about that, but a big component of that was governance. Strengthening governance issues. We knew we were coming down to UNCAC, but yet today we hear that we don't have money for that, man. What have we done with the $400 million, a part of which governance was going to be a big issue, you know, a big part of it? Come on, man, make we get real. If we're really and truly serious. We have heard even the Deputy Prime Minister in his Independence Address speak about the corruption that we have in our country today. So let us get serious.
Now, in putting the ceiling on the Senate investigation, part of the justification is exactly that. It is funding the UNCAC and funding the Integrity Commission. Now, I know in the letter to the Prime Minister, there have been very specific questions regarding why these are the examples being used, when according to the Chamber, there are already funds allocated for some of these activities.
I'm not the expert on UNCAC, but I understand that most of the expenses that have been paid to date have been by the UN. I understand that Belize needs to come up with $50,000 from UNCAC for this year and next year. $50,000? You just borrow 400. Integrity Commission is costing 186,000, I understand, and that is one of the excuses. We just spent $30 million for a basketball and volleyball court fund. Please, we just borrow 400 million more. PetroCaribe is going to be rolling again. We can't take some of that money and invest it into oversight to stop all the leakages, right?
I think that's a fair point.
Yeah.
That's a fair point to make. I mean, when you look at the monies being borrowed and what is being done with the monies, one would want to think that the least that can be done is to be able to set aside funding for these very same activities that provide for supervision and oversight to avoid these recurrences.
That investment, because it's not an expense, that investment will bear fruit and it's going to have returns.
Mm-hmm.
I keep reminding people when they say nobody go to jail, nobody nothing. Look at the DFC and look at the SSB, how they have turned around and transformed. For the most part, you have not heard any major scandals from these institutions. So it just brings awareness to the very employees of those institutions, and they say, boy, guess what? I know they get in at that number because I know going in front of no committee, right? I'm going to follow my rules and regulations and laws. Sorry, Minister, these are the rule, these are the law. As the new director has said,
do you
she's following the law.
Do you anticipate that to be the effect of this whole process?
I'm hoping that at least that will be one of the positives that come out of this process, in that our public service and the people that lead in the public service will begin to take a firmer stand against the politicians and say, no, this cannot be done. Or that at least the systems would have been improved to stop the very public servants from abusing as well and partaking, because they play no small role in all of this. They're the great facilitators, right? They know the strengths and they know the weaknesses of the systems, and they took advantage of it as well, and they benefited from it as well. So we all have a lot to learn from this whole process, and I think that we have learned a lot, and there's more to be learned.
Now, I think if we're to be honest and to look at where our society is at this point, and we've spoken about it several times on this show, where we are in a bit of a cynical place. And I think part of that lends to allowing for the cutting short of the Senate investigation, if that's what takes place, to unfold. People feel helpless. They feel hopeless. They see and continuously hear of allegations of corruption and very little being done afterwards. What the Senate investigation has done so far is to validate information that I think people already knew. That there are persons in public service that are benefiting personally, that there are persons who are involved in this process for the purpose of making money. And we have been seeing this information come out continuously through the Senate investigation and really validating even some of our news reports as well. I want to move a bit to the larger issue that we're talking about. One, it's about corruption, but also we have been speaking about the economy and how monies are being allocated and how taxes being collected and what's not collected for quite some time. And I know that the recent IMF report does have some points on that as well. And I want to get the opportunity to discuss it along with you.
Before you move away from corruption, the Chamber, in its message for the Expo, and I know I would like an opportunity to come back to that, but said we're at this moment, we have more risk of losing our country to this malignant rot of corruption today than to our aggressive neighbor. That was one of the comments made by the Chamber. The Chamber chose to speak about leadership and leaders, and with your permission, I'm going to read from it because it's very important. It says, where we are is a result of the quality of our leaders. We need leaders who are trained and have strength of character to pursue strategic objectives with passion and relentless determination. It all boils down to leadership. We need leaders who are committed to a vision of progress and a vision of sustainable nation building. We need to have a vision of peace and security, a vision of stability and a vision of good governance. These things go hand in hand. You can't expect to have a corrupt government and a corrupt public service and not have corrupt citizens. They feed off one another. But to change it, you have to have vision, and you have to have leadership with a vision, with a passion to change it.
And we must have people who demand it, a public that demands it.
I agree.
There should also be the political will.
But also, that's where you have leadership too. We need to have leaders that are strong and fearless and courageous, right? And they need to inspire the people with this unflinching commitment. So people feel helpless. We're not all leaders in the society. People look up to leadership, and people want. And people will get hopeless in the absence of strong visionary leadership. I am so amazed today, and this is not a political statement whatsoever, how you hear Belizeans of all walks of life and all colors speak today of George Price, the leader of our nation. At one time, people on one side never have nothing good to say about George Price. And today, we all look up and respect and admire the work that man did for our country, his dedication, his vision. Steadfast in what it is. Whether you agreed with him, he was steadfast in what he wanted to accomplish.
He had a vision.
He had a vision. And many people today question that from our leaders. What is the vision? Where do you want to take us? What is it that you want to do? For your people, not for your infrastructure. For the people of this country, for the 8,000 children that come out of school every year, what is our vision for them? What opportunities will they have in this country that others seem to come and enjoy, that our Belizeans cannot enjoy? That's what people want to hear. And that is what the Chamber is saying, right? Now development, right, should not be about political expediency or for vote buying and vote getting, man. You know, it should be because you have this vision and this strategy to take your people out of poverty. You know, we're going to be getting to the IMF in a little while. At one time, Belize enjoyed one of the highest per capita incomes in the region. Today, you know, Belize is second only to Haiti.
Whoa.
In the region and in Central America. Haiti is a failed state. And we're just doing a little bit better than Haiti in GDP per capita income. Imagine that. Imagine that, a country with so much resources and so much money. We have tripled our national debt. How have our people, individuals,
benefited?
How has our society benefited from all that spending? Right? We have streets. Look at the homes. You know how many homes that $30 million could have built in the south side of Belize City? You have people with their houses, they drop down, they leak. That thing could have built 1,000 homes or more easily. Is that a priority? Was that a priority? So we have to decide if these are the priorities that we want If these are the leaders that well, I mean, the voting public voted them in, or democratic process, whether tainted or not. But there are some fundamental questions that need to be asked.
Yeah. And that is a part of, I think, what you were pulling from the speech by President of the Chamber, Nikita Usher, in talking about how we choose our leaders. Yes. You know, the Chamber has taken on the stance of an anti-corruption movement, being instrumental in pushing for the signing of the UNCAC and now speaking out against leadership. And I'll ask you to wear your chamber, your business community hat here to just speak about what the role of the private sector is. You know, so often we hear people talk about, you know, where's civil society, where's the opposition, and we know that sounding the alarm is important. But on a personal level, we were speaking about fuel tax this morning. The business community feels these issues in their pockets as well, and also many times pass it on to consumers as well.
There's a fundamental principle that we have not grasped in this country. And the IMF speaks to it on a regular basis. The government cannot continue to drive our economy by borrowing and spending. It's unsustainable. Mm-hmm. We have to do everything we can to make sure that the private sector truly becomes this engine of growth. Mm-hmm. The private sector will never be the true engine of growth if we continue to have this huge tax burden, if everything that our government consumes makes us more uncompetitive. Mm-hmm. Fuel, you were talking about fuel this morning, it affects all of us. Mm-hmm. Because everything in this country depends on transportation. Yeah. You need to buy gasoline, you need to transport your goods to the markets from the States, in Belize. Mm-hmm. You know, transportation is a key component, and the government recognizes this and knew that this was the perfect place to tax. And they're bleeding it for everything they could. All of these high taxes that government demands is because of our loans that we have borrowed. We've tripled the national debt, and we need to service them now. Imagine, I congratulated the government when it renegotiated its super bond obligations, and our debt to GDP ratios fell to around 80%. Today, our debt to GDP is back at 100%. Mm-hmm. So what did we do with that relief? We borrowed more again. We never negotiate the relief for help or fiscal position. Mm-hmm. From which we start to save. From which we start to plan in the event of a major hurricane. If we have a major hurricane, a category 4, category 5 hits our country now, where will we be? We don't owe 100%. We've heard Caribbean nations speak that they can't raise money because they already hacked out or because they owe. Mm-hmm. The international lending agencies, they're having a difficult time with them.
Isn't it
have we planned? When we got that relief, did we plan? Did we say we are set up on disaster fund? No. We keep hearing about we want to roll it more.
Isn't it from a broader
We had access, sorry, let me finish, because this is a major point. Mm-hmm. We had access to all this cheap money, and we chose to spend everything on projects that are unsupervised, that we now have no accounting. Public Accounts Committee still cannot meet. They don't want to have Public Accounts Committee hearings in public. They promised the Chamber they would reconstitute the Public Accounts Committee a year ago. It's still not done. Now the government is asking us to draft the legislation. Imagine that. Imagine that. Mm-hmm. So how serious are we? That is the question we have to ask. How truly serious are we? They're just words. People are saying they're just words. You're not serious.
My question is, based on everything you just laid out, isn't it from a broader perspective that one can argue that the country is essentially living hand to mouth just as much as its people individually are? I mean, if you look at the fact that if we were to have gotten some relief and we took that opportunity to borrow more as opposed to, as you said, plan and evaluate a proper position going forward, isn't it sort of the example that is being set for us as individual residents, where sometimes we find ourselves in financial crunches and we're able to free up enough to be able to borrow again, but we're not necessarily addressing the very same things that have us in that position? It sounds like a theoretical thing.
No. I have so many ways to answer this. Listen, there's an interesting study. I'm going to put a plug in here for one of my colleagues. One of almost half of our people live in poverty. Science has proven now that when you are undernourished and undercared, when you don't grow up in this strong society, mother, father, strong homes, that you lose at an early age some of your cognitive abilities. Your brain not develop certain regions to grasp certain concepts, to understand certain theories, to have empathy. So we have people that, to be honest with you, in our country that don't understand these concepts. These people choose and select leaders, a lot of them do, right? And they don't understand these things. So we have to find a way how to continue to get this message across to them. I'm going to go off key here, 1 minute. Now, to make matters worse, we see now that for political expediency, and I will say that, we want, both parties are supporting this marijuana initiative. And there is enough scientific evidence to show what the impact of secondhand smoke and marijuana smoke will have, especially on the mental development for children. But yet you see in the proposed legislation, nowhere does it speak to how do we protect children from being exposed to this smoke. So you already have children in poverty, right? At a disadvantage cognitively, and now you're going to do more. You're going to put them in a position now where it's going to be easier for them to be exposed to the second-hand smoke or first-hand smoke. We need to think long-term and strategic, man. What it is that we really want for our people. Do we want to create a society that's educated? Do we want to really give them every opportunity to develop and to do well and to plan so that they don't have to live hand to mouth or $50 to $50 or election to election or every Wednesday go for a handout? How are we trying to get out of that cycle is the question we should be asking. What are we doing to get people out of that cycle? Because it seems that we're doing nothing to get them out of that cycle, right? That is why the Chamber speaks to leadership. And the way to do it, the way to empower these people, at the end of the day, to make them independent of government, is to encourage the business community to grow, to provide meaningful jobs, to create opportunities for them to own their only small business, to have good training, have good work, develop careers, right? These are the things we need to be focused on, not grandiose stadiums and streets that don't help people for eat. Yes, it's important. You need to have infrastructure. Yeah. I'm not saying that, but you can't put all, your eggs in that infrastructure basket. We have to do things for the people, meaningful things for the people. Not just have one lead program for feed 400 or 1,000. We need to worry about all the people. How many people, you're out there, live hand to mouth? How many people right now, they struggle to get their kids back into school?
Isn't it an idea where for us to be able to have true development as a country, as a nation, as a people, that we should have, let's say, equal parts investment in infrastructure as we would invest in social and human capital?
I don't know if there's a formula. I'm saying that it could be cyclical. There are times when you have to focus on different things, but you cannot focus on one thing and ignore the other, right? Also, we need to look, when we make investments, especially substantial investments, we need to be able to evaluate really what impact it's going to have. And many times we don't. We make these investments because of a political promise or because I feel good, right? We build buildings instead of building classrooms and classroom environments, right? Instead of strengthening our teachers. You know, the whole field of education is changing today in the world. All the rules that we grew up under going to school are being thrown out.
Yeah.
This thing about homework, this thing about classroom disciplines that we had, no, that's all being thrown out now. You allow each child to grow at his own pace. You know, hold back the whole class and move at the same speed. So we need to move along. We need to get with it. We're living in a world that is changing, that is dynamic. And if we don't innovate, we'll never be able to compete. And how much innovation do you see really taking place in our country? How much money do we dedicate to research and development? How much money do we truly dedicate to liaising with the public and private sector? Look at the budget that they allocated for the private sector office. It's a joke. Yet you hear the IMF and part of their prescription is saying you have to do things to work and grow the private sector. You must find that mechanism because this country cannot continue owing 100% of its gross domestic product. Can't. Otherwise, when and if we get that hurricane, we're going to be just like a lot of the countries are right now. We don't know what to do. We can't borrow more, and that's going to put us into the Stone Ages. So we need leadership in this country that plans. We need leadership that inspires, leadership that can tell the people of this country what is the vision I have for you. And we need leadership that takes people away from that dependency and root them out of poverty, man. We have to do that.
Okay. Well, Senator Lizarraga, we're completely out of time, and I know we had more issues to cover, but I believe that's a great closing point, and it has been the platform coming out of the private sector at this point in time. So thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share some of the perspectives of the Chamber, and I'm very proud of the present directors and leadership in the Chamber for making this recommitment because to fighting corruption, because corruption has an incredible cost at the end of the day. We need to know what is happening with our public monies, and we need to get the most bang for the buck.
Yeah. Thank you once again.
Thank you too.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by the Pharmacy Association of Belize. So stay tuned.